Thinking Fast and Slow, or summary. Required reading for anyone interested in how we think. In this summary of Thinking Fast and Slow, we'll dive into the concepts that have made Daniel Kahneman's book an absolute classic of modern psychology. If you meet a shy, helpful person who has little interest in the day-to-day goings on the world, and who also has a need for order and structure, what would you think he is likely to be? A librarian or a farmer? Of course, he does sound like a stereotypical librarian. But don't forget about statistics. There are more than 20 farmers for each male librarian in the United States. So yes, he's probably a farmer. He often underestimates our abilities to make the right decision and correct judgments. And Daniel Kahneman, psychologist and winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, can explain why. In his book Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman reveals the limitation of intuitions. Our inner voice, which is romanticized as something almost sacred, but which nevertheless often lets us down, describing our mental life from the viewpoint of the two systems, which is fast and slow thinking. He tells us why we shouldn't blindly believe everything that comes to our mind. Here is a short summary of the book. Part 1. Two systems. To begin, we should mention that the term systems, which Kahneman uses to explain our thoughts and actions, is not used in the traditional sense. The systems he talks about are not entities consisting of parts that interact with each other. Kahneman does this on purpose. When describing them as agents, he lets readers perceive them as fictional characters with individual personalities, abilities, and limitations, which make it easier to understand what he wants to say. Consider two examples. 1. You see a woman's face. Her mouth is wide open, and if she is about to shout, her eyebrows are frowned. It takes you less than a second to make a conclusion that she is angry. That's an instance of fast thinking, and that's system 1. Example 2. You see a problem 17 multiplied by 24. You immediately know it's a multiplication problem, and you can solve it with paper and pencil, or without, but relatively slow. This is a case of slow thinking, and this is system 2. As we can see, system 1 represents our automatic thinking. It operates quickly with little or no vocabulary control. Unlike it, system 2 concerns effortless mental activities. And even though we identify ourselves with system 2, assuming that it's our conscious self that helps us make choices and decisions, it's not so. System 1 generates ideas from system 2, intuitions, impressions, and feelings. It processes situations and usually is good at it since our initial reactions are generally appropriate. However, system 1 is based and prone to making systematic errors. The task of system 2, which is in charge of self-control, is to overcome the impulse of system 1. System 2 is the only one that can follow rules, compare objects or several attributes, and make deliberate choices between options. The automatic system 1 does not have these capabilities. System 1 detects simple relations. They are all alike. The son is much taller than the father and excels at integrating information about one thing, but it does not deal with multiple distinct topics at once. Attention and effort. We believe that our thoughts and actions are chosen by system 2, but in fact they are a result of system 1's work. This phenomenon has a long evolutionary history. The ability to respond to threats immediately and take self-protective actions is still encoded in our memory. For example, if your car starts skidding on oil, you will respond before you are fully conscious of it. However, to make serious judgment, we need to simultaneously maintain several ideas in our memory, and that does require effort. Combining intuition with knowledge makes us work harder, and often we don't really do it. A bias to believe and confirm. System 1 is gullible and biased to believe, while System 2 doubts and checks everything. The problem is that System 2 is often busy or very lazy. So when it comes to forming an opinion or making a prediction, the work is done by System 1. Unfortunately, the associative nature of System 1 makes the test hypothesis the wrong way, not refuting them like philosophers do, but deliberately searching for data that is compatible with the beliefs people already have. Not only does System 1 accept information uncritically, it also tends to exaggerate the likelihood of extreme and improbable events. If someone asks you to predict the likelihood of the tsunami in California, you will probably overestimate the disaster for the simple reason that the images that come to your mind are very dramatic and terrible. Assessing normality. We have a very clear idea of what's normal in our own personal world. As System 1 is responsible for the way our mind links between events, circumstances, and outcomes that co-occur. These links form the pattern of structure of events and determine our interpretation of the present as well as expectation of the future. Everything that is normal doesn't surprise us and vice versa. For example, the sentence, "How many animals of each kind did Moses take into the ark?" can be misleading. Of course, you know that it was not Moses who took animals into the ark but Noah. But both Moses and Noah are close enough in category. That is, they are both biblical characters. So the sentence does not necessarily surprise you enough to become alert and notice the flaw in the question. This peculiarity of our perception can be an obstacle to an objective interpretation of the world. Ease, mood, and intuition. Good mood, intuition, creativity, and gullibility. The components of System 1 go in a cluster. It means that when you are in a good mood, you will rely more on your intuition and be more creative. But at the same time, you will be less vigilant and more prone to making logical errors, as your system too will be turned off. According to Kahneman, there is a link between positive effect and cognitive ease. The ease with which we perceive information. Thinking that everything that requires more effort is not worth our attention. We get into a trap, losing good opportunity. So if, for example, you dismiss a business plan because the font is hard to read, reconsider your decision. Part 2. Heuristics and biases. Heuristics, an approach to problem solving based on previous experiences, leads to numerous mistakes in judgment and to biases. Kahneman discusses these biases from viewpoint of the two systems, saying that people who let themselves be guided by system 1 are more susceptible to biases. Cause and chance. People tend to think that everything has its cause, but casual thinking excludes the chance of randomness of truly random events. Randomness is often taken for regularity, and that means we can complicate things. For example, during the bombing of London in World War II, there was a suspicion that German spies were located in unharmed areas because the gaps looked too conspicuous. Casual thinking made people draw the wrong conclusion. Statistical analysis revealed that the bombing actually was random, even if it didn't look like. The law of small numbers. According to the law, people will often assume that a small sample size can correctly represent a bigger picture. However, it makes us see the world simpler than it is. To counteract this illusion, we should not trust statements made on biases of small amount of data. For example, yes, the studio has had 3 successful films since the new CEO took over, but it is too early to declare he has a hot hand. Anchors. The anchoring effect consists in considering the value of something before estimating it. Any number that is provided to you as a solution to an estimation problem will be an anchor because your own estimates will be close to it. For example, if the price of the house is high, you will consider it as more valuable even if you are trying to resist the influence of the anchor, which is the original price. There is a technique on how to resist anchoring effect. For example, if the seller sets a high price for the house, making a totally outrageous proposal, you shouldn't react with an equally outrageous counteroffer. What Kahneman suggests is unusual but effective. Instantly leave the room or at the least threaten to do so. If the other side insists on these numbers, this way, by mobilizing your system too, you will both protect yourself and make it clear to the other person that this just doesn't work for you. The science of availability. Our personal experiences and vivid images from the past are more present in our minds than incidents that happen to other people, even if these incidents are similar to what happened to us. If a judge makes a mistake that affects you, it will bother you more than similar incidents that you read about in the newspaper. This is why self-biases are so common. We remember our contribution better than the contribution of others, even if they are equally valuable to us. There is also such a phenomena as availability cascade, a chain of events that may start from a minor event or from more serious events reported by media and lead to public panic. According to authors, the most significant practitioners of availability cascades are terrorists. Even though the number of casualties from terror is small as compared to other causes of death, and even though the possibility of an attack is small, the images of disaster repeated by the media make us panic. The reason is the repetition and vividness of images that speak to System 1. The failure of System 2 to process information on time makes us believe our first impression and fall victim to the biases mentioned above and many others. System 2 requires special training. We should learn to doubt our first impressions. This is possible by that is theorem. Part 3. Overconfidence. Paradoxically, it is easier to construct a coherent story when you know little when there are fewer pieces to fit into a puzzle. A comforting conviction that the world makes sense rests on the secure foundation. Our almost unlimited ability to ignore our ignorance. People have a strong erroneous conviction that they can understand the past logically. This makes them believe they can predict the future. This is an illusion. Kahneman says he's heard many people saying that they knew the 2008 crisis was inevitable. Pay attention to the choice of words. They said knew, not thought or felt. This is not true. They could have thought about it, but they didn't have any information it was going to happen for sure. The truth is we cannot reconstruct our beliefs correctly. Very often we succumb to the hindsight biases. I knew it all along effect, which results from our inability to remember how we were surprised when we learned about the results of certain event. The illusion of pundits. The future is unpredictable, but the ease with which the past is explained makes us think it's not. Think about those pundits in business and politics who are invited to TV shows to comment on recent events and predict the future. The irony, says Kahneman, is those who know most are less reliable because they are overconfident. Philip Tetlock, a psychologist at University of Pennsylvania, interviewed 284 people, experts commenting on political and economic trends. They were asked questions both in areas they specialize in and to those where they had less knowledge. The result was interesting. They showed experts were not able to make correct predictions. However, as the author points out, it's not the experts' fault. The world is difficult. This is why, firstly, errors of predictions are inevitable, and secondly, subjective confidence should not be trusted. Intuition and formulas. Intuition is not reliable, but what is? Only Ashton Felton, a Princeton economist, made a statistical formula to predict wine prices. That formula taking into account of property and age. Also included three features of the weather: the average temperature over the summer season, the amount of rain during the harvest, and the amount of rain during the previous winter. The formula was very accurate. The correlation between his prediction and the actual prices is over 90%. Hostility to algorithms. Yes, formulas are effective and reliable, but people don't like them. The main reason is our tendency to value decisions made by humans more than those made by machines or in any other artificial way. On the other hand, we really can make the right decisions, especially if we are specialists in a narrow area. Psychologists can have hunches about the reaction of their patients during therapy sessions, and yes, very often they will be right. However, this concerns only short-term prediction, underlines Kahneman. When it comes to long-term ones, we usually fail. This is why we recommend using formulas wherever possible. Optimist. We cannot choose to be optimist or pessimist. This attitude is inherited. Optimists are very confident and can sustain this feeling in others. Confidence also helps them act when needed. This can lead us to hypothesis that isn't optimist, who have the largest influence on our lives. But is that so? The resilience to overcome difficulties characteristic of optimists is definitely a good thing, but their style also includes a less virtuous feature, taking credit for success. They never take a blame for failures. This can give them a distorted picture of the things. Part 4, Choices. A theory of utility created by Swiss mathematician Bernoulli states that if someone has more wealth, they will take more risk if the rewards are high. But Kahneman says that his theory is missing a very important part, a reference point. The component is included in the prospect theory, together with the concept of loss aversion. This way, the prospect theory is more complex and reliable one. To present how the prospect theory works, Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky created a four-fold pattern, a table that represents scenarios of high and low probabilities, explaining how people attach values to gains and losses in each case. First one, top left cell, high probabilities gains, 95% chance to win $10,000. Risk averse. This is what Bernoulli talked about when people consider prospects to achieve a large gain. They are averse to risk. Besides, they are willing to accept less than an accepted value of gamble. 2. Bottom left case. Low probability gains, 5% chance to win $10,000. Risk seeking. This cell explains why lotteries are so popular. When you have a chance to win, even if it's very small, you can't resist the temptation. Bottom right cell, low probability losses, 5% chance to lose $10,000. Risk averse. Here we can see how insurance companies make money. Top right cell, high probability losses, 95 chance to lose $10,000. Risk seeking. This is when people can make dangerous choices. Risk taking of this kind often turns manageable failures into disastrous. Regret. Speaking about choices, Kahneman also mentioned regrets because it's often experienced by decision makers. We feel regret because we realize there have been alternatives to the choice we made. If it was the wrong one, of course, but when it comes to regret, bias can appear in many contexts. Let's consider the following example. Mr. Brown never picks up the hitchhikers, but yesterday he did and got robbed. Mr. Smith always picks up hitchhikers. Yesterday he also picked some up and also got robbed. Mr. Brown will experience greater regret because this event was abnormal to him. At the same time, from the same reason, because Mr. Brown did something abnormal to him, people would blame him more than Mr. Smith. This is ridiculous. After all, Mr. Smith exposes himself to robbery much more often, so maybe he should regret it more. Making a decision, we often anticipate pain, trying to avoid it at the same time. But susceptibility to regret should not poison our lives. There is a way to adjust to it. When things go badly, just remind yourself that you actually did think about the possibility of regret when making a choice. Part 5. Two selves. In addition to two systems, Kahneman speaks about two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. They are different, and they are in a position of conflict because we often confuse them. For example, if a person listens to a symphony on a disc that is scratched at the end and it produces a horrible sound, he will probably say that the ending ruined the whole experience. But that's not true. The experience took place, and the bad ending couldn't ruin it because it already happened. Saying that it did, the person takes memories to experience. It is compelling cognitive illusion, and it is substitution that makes us believe a past experience can be ruined. The experiencing self does not have a voice. The remembering self is sometimes wrong, but it is the one that keeps score and governs what we learn from living. Rules of money determine which choice we liked more in the past, and then when we have to make a similar choice again, we will choose the thing we liked more. Sometimes this can lead us to really dumb choices. In one of their experiments, Kahneman and his colleagues had people immerse their hands in cold water. The first episode took 60 seconds with water in 14 degrees Celsius. The longer one took 90 seconds, and after first 60 seconds the temperature of the water rose by 1 degree, which caused a slight decrease in pain. Then the participants had to continue the experiment, and they were given a choice which session to repeat, the 60-second or the 90-second one. From the viewpoint of experiencing self, the longer trial was worse. However, 80% of the participants who reported their pain diminished during the second phase chose to repeat it, even though they had to experience 30 seconds of uncertainty pain. This experiment demonstrated the power of remembering self. The second trial was more favorable because the participants liked it more. Here we can also see the neglect of duration. The difference between 60 and 90 seconds was ignored. Our remembering self often makes us feel worse than we should. So if you say your experience, for example a vacation, was horrible, ask yourself, was there a good part? Maybe you're overthinking a bad moment that happened to you at the very end, like a horrible sound at the end of the symphony. Intuition is misleading, yet it's very hard to resist our nature. It seems like a simple task to resist system 1. Recognize the signs that you are in a trap and resort to system 2. Unfortunately, it does not work this way, especially in successful or in stressful situations when we react immediately and involuntarily. This is why Kahneman says, he wrote this book not for decision makers but for critics. Indeed, it is easier to gossip about someone's wrong decision than to make your own. But there is a good part, not being able to hear the voice of our own doubt. We can still predict the reaction of others, and often it saves us from making unnecessary mistakes.